October 7, 2023. Hamas launches the worst attack Israel has ever faced, resulting in the deaths of over 1,200 Israeli citizens and injuring hundreds more. It's the world's third most fatal terrorist attack in history, with only 9/11 and the 2014 Tikrit attack in Iraq being more deadly. This wasn't a random attack by Hamas, it was a carefully coordinated and orchestrated event, with almost every detail planned down to the minute. And we're going to give you a minute-by-minute breakdown of how the attack unfolded and the chaos it caused in Israel, so you can see exactly how the attack went down. An attack nearly 3 years in the making. December 19, 2020. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh declared the start of the first of a series of 4 combat drills that he dubbed Strong Pillar. The drills were planned to deliver a strong message and a sign of unity between Gaza's armed factions, with Hamas essentially forming a coalition with 10 other militant Palestinian groups to take part in a war game-style series of activities. They included the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIJ, along with the Al-Nasser Salah al-Din and Mujahideen brigades. These groups ran the gamut, as the BBC described, from hardline Islamist to relatively secular, but there was a common through line for all. Each shared a desire and willingness to use deadly force against Israel. The Strong Pillar exercises served as building blocks for a full-scale attack, and Hamas went so far as to create training sites in Gaza, some of which were extensive enough to serve as mock Israeli settlements, allowing its fighters to practice overwhelming buildings and taking hostages. Hamas even released footage of the drills, showing masked commanders huddled in a bunker before a volley of rocket fire ensued. Later, the footage cuts to a group of armed fighters overrunning a tank marked with an Israeli flag, pulling the crew member out to detain him as prisoner, tactics that would come to the fore when Hamas launched its attack in 2023. Hamas wasn't hiding its intentions, it was training in plain sight. September 10, 2023. Less than a month before the attack on Israel, with Hamas confident it had drilled its fighters enough, it had also created an official command structure to unify its collection of extremist groups, which were now governed by a joint committee. That committee started publishing images to its official Telegram channel, showing men in uniforms surveilling Israeli military installations built along the Gaza border. The world didn't know it at the time, but those videos were yet more clues that Hamas was planning ways to bypass or overrun those military installations. September 12, 2023. Hamas released videos of the fourth and last Strong Pillar military exercise. This time, footage emerged of Hamas fighters riding around in Toyota pickup trucks, many of which would be later spotted roaming around southern Israel in the days leading up to the October 7th attack. There was more footage of fighters raiding buildings and shooting targets inside, plus Hamas showed beach storming training videos involving boats and underwater divers. Another tactic Hamas would use less than a month later had emerged. By this point, Hamas had assembled a small army of 30,000 fighters within the Gaza Strip. It has also now established links with 10 other militia groups from which it could draw several thousand more fighters if needed. Hamas was ready, and what follows is a minute-by-minute breakdown of the most devastating terrorist attack to ever take place on Israeli soil. October 7, 2023, 6:29 a.m. Air raid sirens started to blare in the early morning hours as Hamas unleashed a massive barrage of rockets from within Gaza. Those sirens were heard as far away from the Gaza border as Beersheba and Tel Aviv. Hamas would later claim that it fired 5,000 rockets during this initial attack, though the Israeli Defense Force, or IDF, says the number was likely closer to 2,500. The Al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's armed wing, began developing rockets in 2001. Initially mocked as fireworks for their short 1.8-mile range, these rockets had evolved significantly by October 7, 2023. The upgraded Qassam-1 now had a 3-mile range with an 11-pound warhead, while Qassam 2 and 3 could reach 7.4 and 10 miles, carrying heavier warheads of 22 and 44 pounds respectively. Hamas also deployed longer-range rockets like the M73, which traveled up to 49 miles but only emitted smoke, and the more potent S-55, J-90 and J-80, capable of reaching Tel Aviv at 59 miles. The R-160 missile, with a 99-mile range, struck deep into Israeli territory, including Haifa. Within minutes, Israeli settlements near the border with Gaza were shrouded in smoke. People sheltered in buildings as air raid sirens blared and chaos reigned. What nobody knew at the time was that the rockets, as devastating as they would be, were to act as a diversion for what would come next. 6:30 a.m. IDF observers at the Kisufim outpost identified Hamas terrorists attempting to storm the base's defenses. They activated remote firing systems to subdue the incoming horde, though those systems quickly ran out of ammunition. As all of this was happening, Hamas was coordinating a full assault that saw its militants storming fences in 60 other locations. Other fighters were entering Israel using paragliders, with many more attempting to enter by sea, using the training they'd displayed during the video footage from the 4th Strong Pillar exercise. 6:32 a.m. Inbal Rabin Lieberman was one of the first Israeli security coordinators to recognize what Hamas was attempting. As the security coordinator of kibbutz Nir Am, Rabin Lieberman ordered the opening of the local armory and equipped her security squad with the weapons they'd need to fight back against Hamas. She was one of the very few who did so during these initial minutes. Her decision was made when she heard strange noises near the kibbutz, which is a Hebrew word for a communal settlement such as a farm. She sounded the alert, opened the armory, and prepared 12 members of a quick response force, which included her uncle, to face down the incoming threat. With the force prepared, she began running to houses. While delivering warnings, she also prepared the occupants to launch ambushes against incoming Hamas fighters. Over the next 3 hours, Hamas militants attempted to storm the kibbutz. They failed. By the end of the attack, Nir Am had lost none of its people, while killing 25 invading Hamas fighters. Rabin Lieberman and her brave defense forces, along with the rest of the kibbutz's residents, would later be evacuated to a hotel in Tel Aviv. Their defense of their territory was a success, even as others fell around them. 6:35 a.m. A Hamas rocket falls in central Israel's Kfar Aviv region, demonstrating just how well developed Hamas's rockets had become since the mocking that surrounded fireworks. This was the first rocket to claim a life. An older resident named Hannah Ben-Artzi became the first casualty among what would later grow to over 1,000. 6:36 a.m. More and more kibbutzim located near the Gaza Strip started reporting infiltration attempts by Hamas. Kisufim was one of the earliest targeted, with terrorists invading to fight against members of its security squad. Unfortunately, those forces weren't alerted early enough to fight off the invaders. Hamas killed 17 people in the kibbutz, including all of its security squad, and took a man named Shlomo Mansour hostage. Mansour was 85 at the time and believed to be still held captive in Gaza, awaiting rescue or release. As for Kisufim, it was reduced to a wasteland. Hamas's rocket assault had destroyed many of the settlement's buildings before the invaders launched their attack. The kibbutz still bears the scars of the attack and has yet to be re-inhabited, likely due to its proximity to the border with Gaza. 6:43 a.m. The first of multiple waves of Hamas forces arrived on Zikim Beach. A small group of terrorists had sailed to the beach in a tiny vessel, successfully evading the Israeli Navy in the process. Many more would soon follow. Other dinghies arrived on the beach in short order, delivering more terrorists, who opened fire on IDF personnel stationed nearby. Zikim Beach would go on to become one of the few victories the IDF could claim during the Hamas attacks. Upon being alerted of the Hamas fighters, Colonel Eitan Patz, who led the Ashdod naval base, ordered his forces to defend the border and some key maritime positions near Gaza Strip. He deployed the 916th Patrol Squadron, which sank 3 of the incoming Hamas boats. Sailors from the Snapir unit, which served as the Zikim Beach security force, were later deployed to use a combination of gunfire and depth charges to neutralize any survivors. Even so, the 300 to 500 defenders of Zikim were still caught unprepared. As more Hamas fighters landed ashore, Israel's security personnel mounted a fierce defense with the limited ammunition they had available. Some were even fighting in their pajamas. Patients were evacuated from the Barzillai hospital. Fighting progressed from the beach into the Zikim kibbutz and its nearby trio of military bases. Hamas killed 19 civilians during this initial fighting, with battles going on to rage for 5 more days until the IDF finally managed to completely clear the area of invading terrorists. At around the same time, the first shots were heard in the Nirim kibbutz as more fighters invaded. 6:45 a.m. Holit is the next kibbutz targeted. Hamas has far more success here than it had in several of the other settlements. Around 40 terrorists stormed Holit, successfully breaching fences to the east and west. It took just minutes for the first home to be overrun. Many of the residents were either asleep or eating breakfast when the raid began, with Hamas militants moving from house to house, shooting at the metal shutters of safe rooms. There was a purpose to this shooting. The shots would reveal if anybody was inside. If the safe rooms were occupied, the militants used grenades and gunfire to breach them before killing the occupants. More grenades were thrown into houses, with Hamas firing indiscriminately on citizens attempting to flee. The terrorists also destroyed vehicles to prevent escape. By the end of the raid, 3 foreign workers and 12 residents, including a member of the kibbutz's security team, were dead. One of those residents was a Holocaust survivor. Hamas also took 7 hostages during the raid. 3 were released on the same day as they were captured, with a further 2 being released as part of a hostage exchange. However, 2 hostages are believed to still be in captivity. It would take around 18 hours for the IDF's Shaldag unit and Paran Brigade to clear the militants from Holit. By that point, the damage had already been done. 6:49 a.m. Over the span of 20 minutes, Hamas had depleted its rocket stocks in what came to be known as Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Mohammed Daif of the Qassam Brigades also officially announced the operation, with this militant wing of Hamas being one of the several that claimed responsibility for the attack. "We announced the start of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and we announced the first strike," Daif said in an official statement. He then proclaimed that the strike exceeded 5,000 missiles and shells, with all being targeted at the enemy installations, airports, and fortifications. The full statement also provided reasoning for the strike. Daif accused Israeli forces of escalating raids on Daif's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, claiming that elderly, young people, and children had been beaten. He claimed that the IDF and Israelis in general attacked and ransacked homes throughout Jerusalem. Daif also pointed toward raids along the West Bank and in Gaza as justification for Hamas's actions. "We've decided to put a stop to all this with God's help so that the enemy can understand that no more can they sow chaos without being held to account," he proclaimed before officially announcing the Hamas operation. For all intents and purposes, the statement was a clear declaration of war against Israel. Daif called on anyone who could do so to pick up a rifle and prepare to fight. 7 a.m. Sirens blared at the Supernova Sukkot gathering in Raim, prompting hundreds of the music festival's attendees to flee. For many, the warning came too late. As the sirens sounded, Hamas militants arrived on trucks and motorcycles, surrounding hundreds of the festival goers. They opened fire, shooting into the crowd and throwing grenades. Many who had escaped into bomb shelters and the surrounding bushes were also tracked down and shot. It would become the single largest massacre that took place on October 7th. Hamas killed 364 people, most of whom were civilians, as well as taking around 40 hostages from the music festival. 7:40 a.m. By this point, Hamas fighters had successfully infiltrated deeper into Israel. Security forces were caught unawares in dozens of locations. The rocket attacks that led so many to run for cover had ended, but their purpose was now clear. They weren't the main strike. The IDF confirmed the rockets were just a cover, albeit a damaging one, for the waves of Palestinian fighters crossing into Israel. Footage also started emerging of the many methods Hamas had used to infiltrate Israel. A video of Zikim Beach highlighted the motorboat carrying the group of 5 Hamas militants that began the storming of that beach. Another video showed a Hamas fighter flying into Israel using a powered parachute. However, the most common tactic by far was to simply attack security barriers separating Gaza and Israel. Months, if not years, of planning had allowed Hamas to identify weak areas in these barriers, with militants using the cover of rockets to break through. Photographs showed Hamas using bulldozers to break down sections of metal fencing. There was even footage of 6 motorcycles carrying militants through a massive hole in a metal barrier. Entire communities had been overrun. Hamas had already killed hundreds and was fighting against security forces. The infiltration was a success. Israel had been caught unawares, though Hamas wouldn't have to wait long before Israel issued a militaristic response. 9:45 a.m. As fighting on the ground continued and Hamas penetrated deeper into Israel, the IDF mobilized its air force. It also released an official statement saying, "Dozens of IDF fighter jets are currently engaging several targets belonging to the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip." As Hamas militants clashed with people on the ground, hundreds of citizens in eastern Gaza were fleeing their homes to avoid Israeli bombs. Photographs later emerged showing the results of these airstrikes. Vast plumes of smoke rose over Gaza, with several of the city's buildings shown to have been reduced to rubble. Citizens were also shown attempting to evacuate on foot carrying bags, and in some cases children. The picture served as a potent reminder that many within Gaza were just as unaware of Hamas's intentions as Israel, just normal people attempting to survive a situation that was beyond their control. 10 a.m. Hamas continued to penetrate military bases and local settlements. The IDF released a statement confirming the militants had gotten inside at least 3 of Israel's military bases near the frontier with Gaza. The Zikim base was mentioned, showing that Hamas's waterborne infiltration efforts had achieved some measure of success. The militants were also inside the Gaza division headquarters stationed in Raim and had overrun the Bayit Hanun border crossing. Hamas also issued another call to arms. Its deputy chief, Salah al-Aruri, released a statement directed at fighters in the West Bank. "We must all fight this battle," he proclaimed, "especially the resistance fighters in the West Bank." The statement ran at odds with the later photographs that showed hundreds of Gaza and West Bank residents attempting to evacuate. Still, Hamas was enjoying some success. More videos emerged, including one that seemed to show Hamas fighters running toward a watchtower in an Israeli military facility as buildings around them burned. Some militants were already back in Gaza celebrating their success. Several Israeli vehicles were captured and paraded through the streets. Details also began to emerge from Sderot. The region had been one of the many that absorbed Hamas's early morning rocket attacks, and as was seen in many kibbutzim and municipalities, the rocket attacks were quickly followed by an invasion of ground forces. Hamas militants entered the kibbutz and engaged in firefights with local police and civilians. The militants were successful. They overpowered the local police garrison, occupying it while killing 30 people in the process. News also emerged of another terrible massacre conducted by Hamas. On the morning of October 7th, a Tor minibus began a journey from Negev to the Dead Sea. Along the way, it stopped off in Ofakim and Netivot to pick up passengers before traveling to Sderot. It would never leave the municipality. The tour bus picked up a flat tire at the entrance to Sderot. A warning siren sounded as the operators attempted to fix the tire. The bus's occupants, many of whom were elderly, with some being Holocaust survivors, got out and attempted to enter a shelter. The doors wouldn't open. In moments, a pair of vans loaded with Hamas militants arrived at the entrance to Sderot. They identified the tour bus and its passengers as Israeli and opened fire from point-blank range, killing the entire group. It's rumored that the terrorists even fired again after killing their targets to ensure they were dead. During the chaos, the bus driver had managed to escape along with a woman. Lying behind a guardrail, they were discovered by the Hamas militants who promptly shot them. The woman died, though the bus driver survived by playing dead until help arrived. All told, the massacre cost 15 elderly Israeli citizens their lives. It also showed that Daif's grand statements of targeting military installations in Israel were false. Yes, Hamas were attacking military bases, but it was also killing indiscriminately, targeting regular citizens just as readily as it was fighting against the IDF and other security forces. Similar raids were also confirmed to have taken place in Be'eri and Ofakim, with the latter being 20 miles east of Gaza. More deaths and hostage-taking followed. By this point, many Israeli citizens living in the south of the country had taken to fortifying their homes in the hope they could serve as makeshift panic rooms and bomb shelters. The IDF was broadcasting messages via radio, telling these citizens that "we will reach you," as they huddled together and hoped that Hamas fighters wouldn't find them. 1:30 p.m. By the afternoon, Israel's main police chief, Yaakov Shabtai, had confirmed that security forces and incoming IDF soldiers were engaging Hamas gunmen in 21 different locations. The surprise element of the attack was over, but fighting continued, with the military confirming at 1:30 that it was actively engaged in clearing the communities Hamas had overrun. News of the death tolls started to emerge. Israel's media reported that at least 100 people, including security officers and civilians, had been killed in the Hamas raids. A further 800 were wounded, with untold numbers having been taken hostage. These claims would be backed by Hamas circulating photographs and videos on social media platforms, supposedly showing dead on both sides of the fighting. It was also at this point that Israel's foreign ministry claimed that Hamas was going from house to house shooting civilians, confirming that the attack focused on more than military targets. As the hours ticked by, more news of death, injury, and hostage-taking had emerged. The initial 100 dead rose, eventually reaching the 1,200 mark mentioned at the beginning of the video. 5 p.m. By early evening, Hamas had attacked 22 locations outside the Gaza Strip, penetrating up to 20 miles into Israeli territory on the ground. Its rockets had traveled much further. PBS reports that the death toll was up to 200 by 5 o'clock, with 1,100 people being wounded. The IDF's aerial barrages in the Gaza Strip were also taking their toll. Almost 200 people, not all of them militants, lay dead in Gaza, with 1,610 believed to be wounded, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took to television to announce a declaration of war against Hamas. In an address to all of Israel, he said that the country was at war. Not an operation, not a round, but a war, he emphasized. He claimed that the enemy would pay an unprecedented price for his actions. It's notable that Netanyahu didn't identify Hamas directly with this statement. His declaration was made against the whole of Palestine, rather than the militant sects that occupied the country. He concluded by warning that Israel would return fire of a magnitude that the enemy has not known. As we know now, Netanyahu was intent on following through on that threat. 7 p.m. Fighting continued to rage. The IDF was now mobilized and entering many of the 22 settlements Hamas had attempted to overrun. Fighting was ongoing, with the IDF claiming that it faced a force of hundreds of Palestinian infiltrators spread across Israel's southern regions. Slowly but surely, the IDF was pushing those militants back, killing many while forcing many more back toward the border with Gaza. At the same time, Israel continued its aerial attacks in Gaza, while Hamas fired more rockets into southern Israel. A war had started. The IDF began to mobilize in the days following Hamas's attack, but the process was surprisingly slow, with Israel's military taking 3 days to reach the border with Gaza. In some places, the IDF fought Hamas militants for several days after reaching that border before finally clearing them out. Limited Hamas rocket attacks also took place, though these weren't smokescreens for more incursions. Hezbollah also launched attacks on Israel on October 8th, supposedly showing solidarity with Hamas despite the two groups having ideological differences. Hamas had achieved its objective. Over 1,000 Israelis were dead, with thousands more injured and several hundred having been taken hostage. Why was the IDF so slow to respond? It could be due to the nature of the Hamas attack. Israel would have had multiple plans in place for a mobilization against Gaza. Under normal circumstances, IDF generals would have selected one of those plans to execute, with units receiving initial orders and traveling to the border within hours. The problem for Israel was the possibility that its plans had been compromised. The IDF feared that Hamas had infiltrated to the point where its spies had obtained its battle plans. Those plans had to be treated as though they were compromised, forcing the IDF to develop a new strategy before it could fully mobilize. It's also important to remember that many of Israel's forward operating bases near Gaza were either under attack or overrun. Hamas had planned its strikes extremely well. First responders, both military and civilian, were surprised and killed, slowing the IDF's response. Still, by October 10th, the IDF was fully mobilized and ready to cross the border into Gaza. At the time of the creation of this video, war has continued to rage between Israel and Hamas for a full year, with the war extending to several other countries. In that time, Israel has conducted over 17,000 attacks in more than 5 countries since declaring its war against Hamas. Palestine is the most obvious, though Israeli strikes have also targeted Islamic militant leaders in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Yemen. As of the beginning of August 2024, over 40,000 people have been killed by Israeli strikes in Palestine, with another 590 in Lebanon and 260 dead in Syria. Yemen and Iran have gotten off lightly. The strikes in those countries have been targeted, resulting in a combined death count of 7, mostly militant leaders and members across the two. Israel's war with Hamas shows no sign of ending anytime soon, despite increasing international pressure for a ceasefire. Perhaps that was Hamas's goal all along. It knew that it couldn't defeat the IDF in a straight fight. But a pinpoint terrorist attack followed by the IDF's response, uniting militant groups throughout the Middle East, that could give Hamas a chance, even as Israel bulldozes through Palestine. The October 7th terrorist attack may well go down in history as the point of no return for relations between Israel and Palestine. But what do you think? Is Israel justified in its response to the attacks? Will a ceasefire ever happen? How long do you think the war will rage? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.